I don't know about you, but I like to cycle between a lot of different kinds of games. But the one thing that always gets to me is research trees. The researched finish pop-up or whatever always takes me out of the game and interrupts whatever I was thinking about at that time. If you ever played Opus Magnum or Potioncraft, then you know how satisfying designing something and investing time to optimize it is. Somehow spending 30 minutes to rework a design and get a 10% improvement feels kind of, real. Now compare that to going into a menu to select 5 tiers of 2% upgrades. You're just starting a new countdown each time, which makes sense for some games, but either way, the whole point of research is to allow you to choose or prioritize how the core gameplay is being modified. The games I mentioned are essentially pure puzzle games, which is fine, but I don't only want to play puzzle games, and I'd eventually get tired of mindlessly shooting the same enemies in another game, or burn out trying to manage all the workers in my colony. And this is a problem I think I have a solution for. I want more games that have a flow between the fun core gameplay and player-driven research to refresh that gameplay. So what the heck do I mean when I say player-driven research? In my mind, this means prioritizing a few important points. First, the player must be able to decide how much time and resources to invest. So in most games, research costs are just arbitrary times and resource sinks decided by the devs. And honestly, resource sinks are just another flavor of time sink anyway. Give this power to the player instead. Let them decide when good enough is good enough. Next, the developer must create challenge through interacting systems and trade-offs. This means avoiding just making enemies with bigger health pools, and it should be up to the player to prioritize what challenges to engage with. Research needs to be treated as a first-class part of the whole, but strong enough to stand on its own. And this applies not just to research, but crafting as well. Simply collecting a list of ingredients and pressing a button isn't compelling or immersive, but being intrusive and blocking access to the rest of the game makes the whole game about that puzzle until the player solves that puzzle. The goal here is for the game to become more than the sum of its parts, and not just have more parts and distractions. Finally, the player must be free to navigate a problem space. So there shouldn't just be 1, 2, or even 5 hard options with different stats. When possible, there should be a gradient of options that all lead to valid and different solutions. The player decides when they are satisfied with exploring the possible solutions. I know I'm not saying anything revolutionary here. There are plenty of games that have mechanics like these. But I haven't seen a game unify these concepts into a complete feedback loop with each other. I really believe this could be a new genre of game, or maybe at least carve out a new niche, but I'm going to call it a new genre because it sounds cooler. Maybe something like modular game. Lots of games are composed of mini-games. Composite game? But I want to take those mini-games and integrate them with a larger game world. So what's the opposite of a mini-game? Mega game? Macro game? Fully integrated immersive sim? Actually, macro sim or something like that doesn't sound too bad. I don't know. Whatever you call it, I see games that are as wide as an ocean and deep as a puddle all the time. What I want more of are games that bring all the immersive elements, simulation, creative problem solving, and actual fun gameplay into a fully cohesive experience. Now, if you're still here, let's talk about some details. I want to be realistic about this. This is meant to be a stepping stone project to prove, to me at least, that this new genre can exist. And since I'm doing this alone in my free time, I obviously have to cut down the scope heavily and work my way up to my full dream game. Someday. Scope creep can easily kill any project, so let's talk about what this game is not. The first feature I need to put way up on the dream shelf is an open world. Properly integrating that would just be too much of a distraction and time sink for now. The next thing going on the shelf is narrative and characters. I want this game to be a tight and focused experience on proving the different mechanics can enhance each other. There's no way I'm about to write the next masterpiece, and people find ways to get attached to randomized characters even in Oxygen Not Included or XCOM. And finally, for now, maybe disappointingly, is graphics. I'm definitely going to have to make use of third-party assets in some respect, since I'm not an artist in anything beyond code. So At the very least, anything you'll be seeing here is going to be utilitarian until the game is a lot more functional. I prefer to integrate graphics as late as possible in the process. Sometimes you'll need something early because the way it looks is important to the way it functions. But I'm not planning to have any must-have amazing graphical effects that need to be factored into the performance budget from day one. I do have an idea of what aesthetics I want in the end, but things are probably going to be ugly and incoherent until then. Sorry. Okay, now that we know what this isn't, let's finally talk about what this game is. So, guns are pretty easy to use, right? Just point and click. But there's a lot more that actually goes into operating them correctly. I want the player to feel that difference. So let's have guns be fully interactable. So when I'm playing Fallout 4 or Darktide, I've got all these crazy weapons. It's cool, but after a while they all start to blend together, and the only thing that ends up mattering is DPS. Now don't get me wrong, the guns in Darktide have a huge amount of character and feel to them, especially when compared to almost any other shooter out there. But for good reasons given the type of game it is, they stop short of making them feel too different from the point, shoot, wait for reload loop. In Fallout 4, good examples are even rarer, but using the laser musket has a bit more depth than other guns. On some level, tapping reload multiple times and having the character on screen pump the gun once for each press, varying the animation speed depending on how you tap it, just feels more immersive. Now, this isn't revolutionary, right? There are tons of VR games that do this, and they are cool, but VR is expensive and maybe not so good for your neck or your eyes or your stomach. So I'd like to see if I can implement similar features, but on a 2D screen. Now, research is obviously going to cost resources on some level, and scavenging and looting is always fun. So I think picking through the aftermath of a battle for usable salvage is a fun way to add resource gathering, and give the player the option to rest and explore a little bit after battle, but before going back into the research mindset. Speaking of research, if every character is the same, you only need to design one best thing for everyone to use. So a good way to mitigate this, and add more flavor to the game as a whole, would be for each character to get a mixture of traits that the player needs to optimize for, and also helps them feel distinct to each other. Similarly, if the only thing that ultimately matters is DPS, there will be one best design. One of the easiest ways to address this is probably to have different roles with different goals. Each character will have a class or role that influences how or what weapons they use. Of course, it also helps if missions are more interesting than just eliminate all enemies. For me, half the point of this is making things and then being able to use them directly yourself. The other half is seeing how the game world reacts to the stuff you made. So I think the player should have a squad of soldiers that they can equip, and maybe even something like, if you lose a battle, the enemy can steal your weapons. And finally, what exactly will the research be? This will probably take the most time, but the player should be able to select various components, assemble them, and link them together to be functional. Players should also be able to customize and optimize the ammunition they're using, and I think it would be weird for guns to be fully interactive, but research is just some menu. So I'd like to see how much of the research can be made interactive, but not frustrating. So considering all that, I'm thinking this should be a relatively simple squad-based skirmish game. And if things go well, implement a map with territories so that you can eventually win the war and finish a run. I really think there's gold to be found in the idea of fully integrating research into the main gameplay loop, and I hope some of you out there think so too, and keep an eye out for more devlogs. But at the very least, you could watch me flail about trying to figure this thing out. Also, let me know in the comments if you think there's anything I should add or remove to keep the project scope realistic. Now, I know I didn't show much of any gameplay yet, meaning nothing, but I figured I'd take my time to explain the premise in this number 0 devlog, and talk more about what I have done in the next one. So here's a little clip to reward anyone that managed to stick around this long.